Sometimes, when a man has lost everything, it takes the smallest soul to show him what's worth saving. Walt Granger was ready to let the desert take him. At 72, with his ranch gone and his wife buried months back, he had nothing left to walk toward. Then came the puppy. Golden fur matted with dust, eyes bright with trust, pawing at his boots as if to say, "Don't leave me." In that moment, something stirred in Walt's hollow chest. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about what happens when two lost souls find each other in the middle of nowhere. Could saving this innocent creature somehow save him too? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun hung in the sky like a copper coin dropped in bleach water, its edges blurred by heat and distance. Walt Granger had been walking since dawn, though he couldn't say exactly why. His boots, cracked leather things held together more by habit than stitching, left shallow prints in the sand that the wind erased almost as soon as he made them. Fitting, he thought. A man could walk his whole life and leave nothing behind but marks that disappeared. He'd been a cattleman for 50 years, back when that word still meant something. The Granger Ranch had been in his family since 1889, carved out of this hard country by his great-grandfather with nothing but determination and a tolerance for suffering. 3,000 acres of mesquite and dust, crossed by a creek that ran 8 months out of the year if you were lucky. It wasn't paradise, but it was his. Or it had been. The bank had taken it 14 months ago. Medical bills from Clara's cancer had piled up like storm clouds, dark and threatening. Then came the drought, 3 years without proper rain. Cattle prices dropped. Feed costs rose. The mathematics of ruin were simple once you laid them out. He'd fought it as long as he could, but a man can't argue with numbers written in red ink. Clara had passed 6 months before they lost the ranch. Maybe that was a mercy. She'd loved that land the way some women love jewelry or fancy things. She'd loved the morning light on the east pasture, the way the cottonwoods turned gold in October, the sound of cattle moving slow and easy across the ground their grandparents had walked. She'd made that ranch a home, not just a piece of property with a fence around it. Walt still wore his wedding band. It was a simple thing, silver worn thin by decades of work. Sometimes he'd spin it on his finger without thinking, the way a man worries a stone in his pocket. The metal was warm now from the desert heat and his own skin. It was the only thing of value he had left, and he wouldn't sell it. Not for food, not for water, not for anything in this world or the next. After Clara died, he'd tried to care about the ranch. He'd gone through the motions, feeding the few remaining cattle, fixing fence, checking water tanks. But it was like trying to hold smoke. The purpose had leaked out of everything. When the bank finally came with their papers and their polite, apologetic words, he'd felt something like relief. At least he wouldn't have to pretend anymore. His daughter Sarah lived in Phoenix with her husband and 2 kids. She'd called every week after her mother passed, her voice tight with worry. "Come stay with us, Daddy," she'd say. "We've got the guest room. The kids would love to have you close." But Walt couldn't do it. Couldn't sit in a climate-controlled house in a subdivision, watching his grandbabies play video games while his son-in-law talked about market shares and quarterly projections. That wasn't living. That was waiting to die with air conditioning. So he'd taken what little money remained after the debts were settled, bought himself some supplies, and started walking. East into the desert. He told himself he was going to see the country, maybe find work on another ranch, start fresh somewhere. But that was a lie, and he knew it. A man his age didn't start fresh. He just found new ways to finish. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless and indifferent. This was the Sonoran, the kind of country that didn't care whether you lived or died. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, their arms raised in perpetual surrender. Creosote bushes dotted the landscape, their smell sharp and resinous in the heat. In the distance, mountains rose up purple and hazy, beautiful and unreachable. He'd been walking for 3 days, rationing his water, eating sparingly from the few supplies in his pack. His canteen was nearly empty now. He'd need to find a town soon, or a ranch, or a highway, something. But he kept walking away from those things rather than toward them. Some part of him, the part that still spoke with Clara's voice, knew what he was doing. He was walking until he couldn't walk anymore. The morning of the 4th day, he'd woken to find his canteen bone dry. He must have been careless with it the night before, or maybe the cap hadn't been tight. Didn't matter. The result was the same. He had maybe a day, 2 if he was lucky, and the temperature dropped. But luck hadn't been running his way for a long time now. He kept walking anyway. What else was there to do? The sun climbed higher, and his shadow shrank beneath him. His lips cracked. His tongue felt thick and foreign in his mouth. Twice he thought he saw water in the distance, pools of silver shimmering on the sand, but they were mirages. Tricks of light and heat and desperation. Around midday, when the sun was at its worst and the world seemed to vibrate with heat, he heard it. A sound so small and out of place that at first he thought he'd imagined it. A whimper. High-pitched and scared and very much alive, Walt stopped walking. He stood there swaying slightly, trying to locate the sound. It came again, from somewhere off to his right. He turned, his vision swimming, and saw movement near a cluster of barrel cacti. Something small and golden. He walked toward it, each step requiring more effort than it should. As he got closer, the shape resolved itself into something impossible. A puppy, no more than 8 or 10 weeks old, fur the color of late summer wheat, sitting in the meager shade of a palo verde tree. The little thing was panting hard, its pink tongue hanging out, its brown eyes fixed on Walt with an intensity that seemed too large for such a small creature. What in the world? Walt's voice came out as a croak. Rough from disuse and dehydration, the puppy stood up on shaky legs and took a few steps toward him. It whimpered again, more urgently this time. Then it did something that broke through the fog of Walt's resignation. It pawed at his boot, not frantically but deliberately, once, twice, 3 times. Like it was trying to get his attention, like it was asking for help. Walt dropped to his knees, which sent a spike of pain through his joints. Up close, the puppy looked even worse than he did. Its fur was matted with dust and what might have been dried blood. One of its ears had a small tear in it. Its ribs showed beneath its coat. But its eyes were bright and clear, and when it looked at Walt, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. 2 creatures that had no business being alive in this place, finding each other anyway. "Where'd you come from?" Walt asked, his voice gentler now. He reached out a weathered hand, and the puppy didn't flinch, just leaned into his touch, its whole small body trembling with relief or exhaustion or both. There was no collar, no tag, no sign of where it had come from or who it belonged to. Maybe dumped from a car on some lonely highway. Maybe wandered away from a ranch and got lost. Didn't matter. What mattered was the puppy was here, and it was dying just as surely as Walt was. He should leave it. He knew that. He didn't have water for himself, let alone enough to share with a dog. Every minute he spent here was a minute closer to his own end. The smart thing, the practical thing, was to keep walking. Let nature take its course. The desert didn't care about good intentions or soft hearts. It just took what it wanted and left the bones. But Walt couldn't do it. Couldn't walk away from those eyes, from that desperate trust. Maybe it was because he'd been a father, and something in him still responded to helplessness. Maybe it was because Clara had always loved dogs, and leaving this one felt like a betrayal of her memory. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe, after all these months of walking through his own private darkness, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. He unshouldered his pack and dug through it until he found an old tin cup. There was perhaps a mouthful of water left in the canteen, if he was lucky. He poured it into the cup and held it out to the puppy. The little thing drank with desperate gulps, its tail wagging weakly. "That's all there is," Walt said, watching the puppy lick the last drops from the metal. "But we'll figure something out. We've got to." The puppy looked up at him, and Walt felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't hope exactly. Hope was too strong a word for what he felt. But it was something. A reason to take the next step, and then the one after that. Not for himself, he was ready to be done. But for this small creature that had somehow found him in all this emptiness. He stood up, his knees protesting. The puppy stood too, its legs still shaky, but its resolve clear. It wasn't going to stay here. It was going to follow him. "All right then," Walt said. He adjusted his pack and started walking again, this time with purpose. East toward the mountains, where there had to be water, had to be something. The puppy fell into step beside him, its small paws leaving tiny prints next to his larger ones. Behind them, the desert stretched out silent and vast. Ahead, the unknown waited. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Walt Granger wasn't walking toward the end of something. He was walking toward the beginning. They walked for an hour before Walt realized how serious their situation truly was. The puppy's determination had masked its weakness at first, but now the little thing was stumbling every few steps. Its panting had become shallow and rapid, a sound that Walt recognized from 50 years of working with animals. Heat exhaustion may be worse. The same thing was probably happening inside his own body. Though he'd stopped paying attention to his own distress signals long ago, he stopped in the shade of an outcropping. Not much relief, but better than nothing. The puppy collapsed immediately, its sides heaving. Walt lowered himself down beside it, his joints cracking in protest. He pulled out his canteen and shook it, empty, bone dry. Nothing but the metallic echo of absence. From his shirt pocket, he drew out a photograph. It was creased and faded, the corners soft from handling. Clara, taken on their 40th anniversary. She was standing in front of the ranch house, her hair silver in the sunlight, her smile warm and genuine. She'd worn her favorite blue dress that day. Walt had taken the photo with an old Polaroid camera Sarah had given them. He'd carried it ever since she died, a talisman against forgetting. "This is Clara," he said to the puppy, holding the photo where it could see, though he knew it was foolish. "She would have loved you. Had a soft spot for strays and creatures that needed help." The puppy's eyes tracked the photo, then moved back to Walt's face. There was something in that gaze that reminded him of Clara, actually. That same quality of seeing straight through to what mattered, past all the noise and pretense. "She'd say I was being stubborn," Walt continued, his voice rough. "She'd say, 'Walt Granger, you get yourself and that poor dog to civilization right now, you hear me?' And she'd be right. She was always right." He tucked the photograph back into his pocket, over his heart. The puppy whimpered softly, and Walt placed his hand on its head. The fur was hot to the touch, too hot. They needed water, and they needed it soon. Not tomorrow, not in a few hours, soon. Walt pulled himself to his feet and scanned the horizon. Mountains to the east, still miles away. Nothing but desert in every other direction. Wait, there. Was that smoke? He squinted against the glare. Yes, a thin column rising maybe 2-3 miles north. Where there was smoke, there were people. Where there were people, there was water. "Come on, little one," he said, bending down to scoop up the puppy. It was heavier than it looked, all bone and dead weight. He cradled it against his chest with one arm, his pack hanging from the other shoulder. "We're going to make it." Both of us. The walk toward the smoke column became a test of will. Each step felt like wading through sand up to his knees. The sun pressed down on his shoulders like a physical weight. Sweat had stopped forming on his skin, a bad sign. He was past sweating, into the territory where the body started shutting down to conserve what little moisture remained. The puppy had gone limp in his arms, though he could feel its heart still beating against his chest. Fast and fluttery, like a bird's. Walt talked to it as he walked, a steady stream of words that kept them both tethered to consciousness. "First thing we're going to do is get you some water. Then food, you need food, put some weight on those bones. Clara used to make this stew, beef and vegetables, simmered all day until the meat fell apart. She'd give the scraps to the ranch dogs and they'd love her for it. Followed her everywhere." His boot caught on a stone and he stumbled, nearly dropping the puppy. He caught himself, pain shooting through his ankle. "Keep moving." That was all that mattered. Keep moving toward the smoke, had this one dog, Rusty. Red heeler, smart as paint. That dog could work cattle better than most cowboys I knew. Clara found him on the highway, hit by a car. Brought him home in a cardboard box, nursed him back to health. He lived 14 years after that. Good years, the smoke was closer now. Walt could make out shapes, a building, maybe a truck. His vision was playing tricks on him, doubling and blurring, but he kept his eyes on that smoke like it was the North Star. "You're going to be like Rusty," he told the puppy. "Going to make it through this. Going to have good years ahead of you. I promise you that." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. What was he doing? He couldn't take care of a dog. He couldn't take care of himself. He was a broke old man with no home, no prospects, wandering through the desert like a ghost. What did he have to offer this creature except more suffering? The puppy stirred against his chest and made a small sound. Not a whimper exactly, something else, almost like reassurance. And Walt understood something then, something Clara would have told him if she'd been there. It wasn't about what he could offer the puppy. It was about what the puppy was offering him. A reason, a purpose, something to hold on to when everything else had slipped through his fingers. "All right," he said, his voice stronger now. "All right. We're going to make it." The smoke turned out to be coming from a burn barrel behind what looked like an abandoned service station. The building was sun-bleached and half-collapsed, its windows broken, its gas pumps long since removed. But there was a rust-stained spigot jutting from the concrete pad. And miraculously, impossibly, when Walt turned the handle with shaking hands, water came out. It was brown at first, then cleared to something approximating clean. Walt didn't care. He cupped his free hand under the stream and brought it to the puppy's mouth. The little thing lapped weakly, then stronger. Its tail moved, just a flutter, but it was movement. Walt drank next, great gulping mouthfuls that tasted of rust and minerals and life. He drank until his stomach cramped, then splashed water over his head and neck. The puppy got its own shower, which seemed to revive it somewhat. Its eyes opened fully, and it looked at Walt with something like gratitude. They sat in the shade of the collapsed building, while Walt refilled his canteen and tried to think. The station was abandoned, probably had been for years, but it was on what looked like an old highway, mostly reclaimed by the desert, but still visible. Follow it east and eventually they'd find something. A town, a ranch, people. He opened his pack and found the last of his food, 3 strips of jerky and half a granola bar. He tore the jerky into small pieces and fed them to the puppy, who ate with more enthusiasm than it had shown for anything except water. The granola bar he split between them. Not much, but enough. "For now, we need a name for you," Walt said, watching the puppy lick crumbs from its paws. "Can't keep calling you puppy forever." The little dog looked up at him, head tilted. "How about hope?" Walt tried the word, tasted it. Too obvious, too heavy with meaning. "No, not hope, something simpler." The puppy yawned, showing pink gums and tiny white teeth. In the fading afternoon light, its golden fur looked almost luminous. "Sunny," Walt said. "That's what we'll call you, Sunny, because you're bright, and because you showed up when everything seemed dark." Sunny's tail wagged. A proper wag this time, and Walt felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite happiness, but adjacent to it. Contentment, maybe. Or just the simple satisfaction of having made one good decision in a long string of bad ones. They spent the night in the station, Walt using his jacket as a bed for Sunny and his pack as a pillow for himself. The desert cold came on fast after sunset, and he pulled the puppy close for warmth. Above them, stars filled the sky in numbers that city people never got to see. Clara had loved the stars. She could name the constellations, tell their stories. "See that one," Walt said, pointing up. "That's Orion, the hunter. And that bright one there, that's Sirius, the dog star." Sunny nestled against his chest, already asleep. Walt kept talking anyway, to the stars and the night and the memory of his wife. Because talking kept the loneliness at bay, and because somewhere between finding this puppy and naming it, he'd decided something. He was going to live. Not just exist, not just wait for the end. Actually live. For however long he had left, he was going to make it count. The desert wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. Tomorrow they'd follow the highway east. Tomorrow they'd find help, find a future. But tonight they had water and shelter and each other. For now, that was enough. Morning came with a gentleness that felt like mercy. Walt woke to find Sunny already awake, sitting at the edge of the concrete pad, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of amber and rose. The puppy turned when it heard Walt stir, its tail wagging, and something about that simple gesture of joy hit Walt harder than he expected. When was the last time anyone had been happy to see him wake up? They shared water from the spigot and the last piece of jerky from Walt's pack. Then Walt pulled out something he'd been carrying but hadn't looked at in days. An old road map, the paper kind that gas stations used to give away for free. It was outdated by at least 20 years, its folds worn soft as cloth, but it still showed the basic geography of the region. He spread it on the ground, using rocks to hold down the corners against the morning breeze. His finger traced the thin line of what he thought might be this highway. State Route 78, running east through the desert toward the small towns that dotted the landscape like scattered seeds. According to the map, the nearest town was Copper Springs, maybe 15 miles ahead. 15 miles! In his younger days, that would have been nothing. Now with a puppy to carry and his body running on fumes and stubbornness, it might as well be 50. "We'll take it slow," he told Sonny, folding the map back into his pocket. "No rush. We get there when we get there." They set off as the sun climbed, following the cracked asphalt east. The highway was in worse shape than Walt had hoped. Entire sections had been reclaimed by sand and sage, and in some places the pavement had broken into chunks, like a jigsaw puzzle coming apart. But it was a path, and paths had destinations. Sonny walked beside him for the first mile, occasionally trotting ahead to investigate a smell or a shadow, then circling back as if to make sure Walt was still there. The puppy's energy had returned somewhat after the water and food, but Walt could see it was still weak. Every so often Sonny would sit down abruptly, panting, and Walt would stop too, using the time to rest his own weary legs. During one of these stops, Walt noticed something that made his stomach tighten with worry. Sonny's paws were bleeding, small cuts, probably from the rough ground and stones. The puppy hadn't complained, hadn't whimpered or limped, but the red marks on the pavement told the story plainly enough. "Why didn't you say something?" Walt asked, though he knew it was a foolish question. He tore strips from his spare shirt and wrapped Sonny's paws as best he could, fashioning crude booties that looked ridiculous but might help. Sonny tolerated this with patience, only trying to chew the fabric once before Walt gave it a stern look. "We're a pair, aren't we?" Walt said, examining his own blistered feet. Both of us held together with improvisation and prayer. They continued, but slower now. Walt carried Sonny when the puppy started to flag, switching arms when one got tired. The sun beat down without mercy, and even though he'd refilled the canteen, Walt knew they were going through water faster than was wise. They'd need to find more before Copper Springs, or they'd be right back where they started. Around midday, they came across the first sign of other human beings. A burned-out car sitting in the desert about 20 yards from the highway. It'd been there a long time, judging by the rust and the way the tires had completely disintegrated. Walt approached it cautiously, Sonny cradled in his arms. You never knew what you might find in abandoned vehicles out here. The car was empty, except for trash and sand. But in the back seat, half buried under debris, Walt found something useful, a plastic jug with about an inch of water in the bottom. It smelled stale and probably wasn't safe to drink, but for washing wounds or cooling down in an emergency, it would do. He tucked it under his arm along with Sonny. They pressed on. The highway rose and fell with the contours of the land, and each rise felt steeper than the last. Walt's breathing became labored, his heart pounding in his chest in a way that worried him. He was pushing too hard, he knew. But what choice did he have? Stop, and they'd die out here. Keep going, and they might die anyway, but at least they'd die trying. "Tell you what," he said to Sonny, his words coming between breaths. "If we make it through this, when we make it through this, I'm going to find you the biggest, juiciest steak you ever saw. How's that sound?" Sonny licked his chin, which Walt took as agreement. Late afternoon brought a new complication. Dark clouds began building to the west, piling up against the mountains like smoke from a vast fire. Walt watched them with mixed feelings. Rain would mean water, which they desperately needed, but it would also mean getting soaked in the desert at night, which could lead to hypothermia once the temperature dropped. He'd seen men die from exposure in the desert, and it wasn't the heat that killed them. It was the cold that came after. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and ozone. Sonny whimpered and pressed closer to Walt's chest. Animals could sense storms in ways humans couldn't, and this puppy's nervousness told Walt everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be a gentle shower. This was going to be serious weather. He needed shelter, and he needed it fast. Walt scanned the landscape, looking for anything. An overhang, a cave, a building. Nothing, just open desert and that damned highway stretching ahead like a promise that kept receding. Then he saw it. Maybe a quarter-mile ahead, just visible through the heat shimmer, something that looked like a structure. Could be a mirage, could be real. Only one way to find out. Walt tucked Sonny more securely against his chest and started walking faster, ignoring the protests from his body. The structure turned out to be real, an old ranch gate, the kind that arched over a dirt road leading off the highway. The gate itself was rusted metal, spelling out words that time had mostly erased. But it was the road that interested Walt. Roads led to buildings, and buildings meant shelter. He turned off the highway and followed the dirt track. The wind was stronger now, whipping sand into small devils that danced across the ground. Thunder rumbled in the distance, deep and ominous. Sonny buried its face against Walt's shirt. The road curved around a low hill, and there it was, a homestead. Small, maybe just a few buildings, but standing. Walt's heart leapt. They'd made it. They'd actually made it. But as he got closer, his relief turned to uncertainty. The place looked abandoned, like the gas station had been. The main house was dark, its windows empty eyes staring out at the desert. The barn listed to one side, its roof partially collapsed. Fence posts leaned at crazy angles, their wire long since rusted through. Still, it was shelter, and right now, with the storm bearing down on them, shelter was all that mattered. Walt carried Sonny toward the house, his boots crunching on gravel and glass. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, hitting his hat with audible thumps. Lightning flashed, closer now, and the thunder that followed made Sonny shake. "It's all right," Walt said, climbing the steps to the porch. "We're going to be all right." He tried the door. Locked. Of course it was locked. He moved to a window, found it open a crack, and with some effort managed to lever it up enough to climb through. He handed Sonny in first, then pulled himself over the sill, his old bones protesting every inch of the way. Inside, the house smelled of dust and time, but it was dry and it was out of the wind. That was enough. Walt set Sonny down gently and looked around, trying to let his eyes adjust to the gloom. They'd made it this far. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The storm hit with biblical fury. Rain hammered the roof like buckshot, and wind howled through gaps in the walls, making the old house creak and groan. Walt found a couch in what must have been the living room, sagging and mouse-eaten, but better than the floor. He settled onto it with Sonny curled against his side, both of them listening to the storm rage outside. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, stark flashes. Walt could see furniture covered in dust sheets, a fireplace filled with old ash, pictures on the walls turned dark with age and neglect. This had been someone's home once. A family had lived here, eaten meals together, celebrated birthdays and holidays. Now it was just a shell, waiting for time to finish what weather had started. "Reminds me of our place," Walt said to Sonny, his hand stroking the puppy's damp fur. "Not the condition, but the feeling. A ranch house feels different from other houses. There's a kind of, I don't know, honesty to it. Everything's built for purpose, not show." Sonny made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been exhaustion. The puppy's breathing had evened out, and Walt thought it might be falling asleep. Good. Sleep was healing. And this little one needed all the healing it could get. When the lightning flashed again, Walt noticed something on the far wall, a medicine cabinet, its white door hanging slightly ajar. He extracted himself carefully from under Sonny, who barely stirred, and crossed the room. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and something small scurried away in the darkness. Mice probably, or rats. Didn't matter. He opened the cabinet fully. Inside, covered in dust but still intact, were supplies. Not much, but more than he'd had before. Bandages yellowed with age but still in sealed packages. A bottle of hydrogen peroxide half full, antibiotic ointment, aspirin, and in the back, almost hidden, a small bottle of children's vitamins shaped like cartoon characters. Walt gathered what he could use and brought it back to the couch. Using water from his canteen and some of the bandages, he cleaned Sonny's paws properly, removing the makeshift booties he'd fashioned earlier. The cuts weren't as bad as he'd feared, shallow, already beginning to scab over. He applied the ointment carefully, then wrapped each paw with actual bandages. Sonny woke during this process but didn't struggle, just watched Walt with those trusting brown eyes. "There," Walt said, tying off the last bandage. "That should help. You'll be running around again before you know it." He took 2 aspirin for himself. His joints were screaming, and his head pounded from dehydration and exertion. Then he tucked the rest of the supplies into his pack. "Waste not, want not." Clara had always said that. She'd grown up during harder times, when you used everything and threw away nothing. The storm continued outside, but the initial fury had passed. Now it was just steady rain, the kind that soaked deep into the ground. Walt found himself relaxing despite everything. There was something soothing about being inside while it rained, safe, protected. He hadn't felt safe in a long time. He stood and began exploring the house more thoroughly, lighting his way with a small flashlight he'd been saving for emergencies. The kitchen yielded little. Cabinets mostly bare, a few cans so old and rusted that their labels had disintegrated. He left those alone. Food poisoning would kill them just as surely as thirst. But in the pantry, on a high shelf, he found a jar of honey. The lid was rusted shut, but when he finally wrestled it open, the contents inside were still good. Honey never spoiled, he remembered reading somewhere. People had found honey in Egyptian tombs thousands of years old, still edible. He dipped a finger in and tasted it. Sweet and thick, it coated his throat like medicine. He brought it back to the couch and gave Sonny a small amount, which the puppy licked enthusiastically. A bedroom revealed more about the people who had lived here. There were 2 twin beds, both covered in dust but still made up, as if waiting for children who would never return. On the dresser, a music box shaped like a carousel. Walt wound it up, half expecting nothing, but it still worked. A tinny melody filled the room. Something classical that he couldn't name, but that Clara probably would have recognized. He found photographs in frames on the nightstand. A family, mother, father, 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They were standing in front of this very house, but in better days. The house was freshly painted, the yard neat, hope visible in every face. Walt wondered what had happened to them. Had they left by choice, or had circumstances forced them out, the way circumstances had forced him? In the closet, he found blankets. They smelled musty, but they were intact and would provide warmth. He took 2, shook them out on the porch despite the rain, and brought them back inside. Sonny immediately burrowed into one, making a nest. The rain began to ease as darkness fell completely. Walt made a bed on the couch using the second blanket and his jacket as a pillow. Sonny relocated from the floor to curl up against his chest. A warm, living weight that made all the difference between loneliness and companionship. "You know what tomorrow is?" Walt asked the puppy. "Tomorrow is the day we make it to Copper Springs. Get you to a vet, make sure you're really okay. Get ourselves some proper food. Maybe find a place to stay for a few days. Figure out what comes next." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. What did come next? He had maybe $40 to his name. No job, no home, no prospects. He couldn't keep wandering the desert with a puppy. That wasn't a life. That was just slow-motion surrender dressed up as adventure. And yet, he looked down at Sonny, already asleep, trusting him completely. He couldn't imagine abandoning this little creature either. Not after everything they'd been through together. The puppy had given him something to live for when he'd been ready to die. That meant something. That meant everything. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving the desert clean and new. Water dripped from the eaves, a gentle percussion. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled and others answered. The sounds of the wild, the sounds he'd known his whole life. Walt closed his eyes and thought of Clara. If she were here, what would she tell him? He knew the answer immediately. She'd tell him to stop overthinking it. She'd tell him that life didn't always offer clear paths, but you took the next step anyway, and then the one after that, trusting that the path would reveal itself. She'd tell him that sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances if you just kept your heart open. "I'm trying, Clara," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm really trying." Sonny stirred against his chest, made a small sound in its sleep. A dream sound. Walt hoped it was a good dream. The puppy deserved good dreams. His own eyes grew heavy. The couch was surprisingly comfortable, or maybe he was just that tired. Either way, sleep pulled at him like a tide, and he let it take him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. Tonight, they had shelter and safety and each other. The rain whispered against the windows, a lullaby older than memory. And in that forgotten house, in the middle of the desert, an old cowboy and a young puppy slept peacefully, their breathing synchronized, their hearts beating in quiet harmony. Walt woke to sunlight streaming through the dusty windows and the sound of Sonny whimpering. The puppy was standing by the door, clearly needing to go outside. Walt's entire body protested as he sat up. Every muscle had stiffened during the night, and his joints felt like they'd been replaced with rusty hinges. Getting old was not for the faint of heart. He limped to the door and let Sonny out, watching from the porch as the puppy carefully navigated the muddy yard on its bandaged paws. The storm had transformed the desert. Water pooled in every depression, and the air smelled clean and alive. Plants that had seemed dead yesterday now showed hints of green. The desert knew how to take advantage of rain when it came. While Sonny explored, Walt walked around the property, taking stock. The barn was in worse shape up close, one good windstorm away from complete collapse. But there was a shed behind the house that looked more stable, and when Walt tried the door, it opened. Inside, covered in tarps and bird droppings, sat an old pickup truck. A Ford, maybe from the 70s, its blue paint faded to a pale ghost of itself. Walt's heart jumped. If this thing ran, if it had even a prayer of running, it could change everything. He could drive them to Copper Springs, maybe even further. He tried the door, locked. He looked around for keys, checked the visor, the usual hiding spots. Nothing. Frustrated, he walked back to the house and searched more thoroughly, going through drawers and cabinets. In the kitchen, in a jar labeled spare, he found keys. 3 different sets. He grabbed them all and hurried back to the shed. The second key worked. The truck door opened with a groan of protest, and the smell of old leather and mouse nests wafted out. Walt climbed in, noting the manual transmission, the bench seat, the simplicity of an era before computers controlled everything. This was a truck a man could understand, could fix if it broke. He tried the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. Dead battery, probably. But when he checked, there was no battery at all. Just empty cables and a space where it should have been. Someone had removed it, maybe to use in another vehicle or to keep from a theft. Walt sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, and felt defeat wash over him. For a moment he'd let himself hope. For a moment he'd imagined an easy solution. But life didn't work that way. It never had. He climbed out and continued searching the shed. There were tools, most rusted but some still usable. Fence wire nails, old lumber, and in the back, under a tarp, several jerry cans. Walt shook them. One was empty, but the other 2 sloshed. Gasoline. Old gasoline, probably bad, but gasoline nonetheless. Well, Walt said to himself, at least we know the universe has a sense of humor. Gas but no battery, truck but no way to start it. Sonny had wandered into the shed and was sniffing around with interest. The puppy's bandages were already dirty from the mud, but it was moving better. The rest and the medical attention had helped. Walt knelt down and examined Sonny's paws. The cuts were healing cleanly, no sign of infection. "You're tougher than you look," he said, running his hand over the puppy's head. "That's good. You'll need to be." He stood and looked out at the desert, trying to decide what to do. They could continue on foot to Copper Springs, probably another day's walk, maybe less. Or they could stay here another night, rest up, maybe scavenge more supplies. The house offered shelter, and there was still some honey left. But every hour they delayed was an hour his meager funds weren't getting them. Closer to help. The decision was made for him when he tried to walk back to the house, and his ankle, the one he'd twisted yesterday, gave out completely. He went down hard, catching himself with his hands, pain shooting up his leg like electricity. Sonny rushed over, licking his face with concern. "I'm all right," Walt said through gritted teeth. Though he clearly wasn't, he managed to get to his feet, but putting weight on the ankle sent fresh waves of pain through him. Sprained, maybe worse. He limped back to the house and collapsed on the couch, Sonny jumping up beside him. He examined the ankle. Already swelling, the skin discolored. He needed ice, elevation, rest. He had none of those things except rest, and rest meant staying put. So the decision was made. They'd stay another day, maybe two. Give his ankle time to heal, give Sonny more time to recover. Then they'd push on to Copper Springs. Walt wrapped the ankle as best he could with the remaining bandages and propped it up on the arm of the couch. Then he pulled out the photograph he'd found in the bedroom, the family standing in front of the house. He studied their faces, looking for clues about their lives. The father had the weathered look of a rancher, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. The mother was younger, pretty, with a cautious smile. The kids, maybe 8 and 10, had that restless energy of children forced to stand still for a photo. A normal family, a happy family, or at least one that knew how to look happy for the camera. What had happened to them? Walt found himself constructing stories. Maybe the ranch had failed, like his had. Maybe they'd moved to the city for better opportunities. Maybe they'd just decided this life was too hard, too lonely, too uncertain. He couldn't blame them if they had. This country asked a lot of the people who tried to make a living from it, or maybe something worse. Maybe illness or accident, or any of the 100 ways fortune could turn against you. The house had that feeling of sudden abandonment, as if people had left meaning to come back and never did. Walt placed the photograph face down. Looking at it made him think too much about his own losses, his own failures. Better to focus on the present, on the concrete problems in front of him. Ankle, water, food, shelter. Take care of those things, and the future would take care of itself. He spent the day resting, letting Sonny in and out, rationing their water and the honey. His ankle throbbed constantly, but by evening the swelling had gone down slightly. Maybe it wasn't as bad as he'd feared. Maybe he'd gotten lucky. As darkness fell, Walt lit a small fire in the fireplace using wood he found stacked near the hearth. It was a risk. Smoke from the chimney might attract attention, but the temperature was dropping fast and he needed warmth. Sonny curled up near the fire, the flames making its golden fur glow. "We're going to be okay," Walt said, more to convince himself than the puppy. "A couple more days, then we'll move on. Find some work, find a place to stay." Figure this all out, but doubt gnawed at him. Who was going to hire a 72-year-old cowboy with a limp and a dog? Who was going to trust him with responsibility when he couldn't even take care of himself? He'd been fooling himself, thinking he could make this work. Sonny deserved better than an old man who was falling apart one piece at a time. As if sensing his thoughts, Sonny got up and walked over to the couch, jumping up despite Walt's protests about muddy paws. The puppy settled against his side, warm and solid and real, and Walt felt something shift in his chest. Maybe it didn't matter what he deserved or didn't deserve. Maybe what mattered was that this small creature needed him, and he needed it. Maybe that was enough. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. Walt watched the fire burn down to coals, Sonny breathing steadily beside him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight they were warm and safe and together. For now, that had to be enough. On the second morning at the homestead, Walt woke to a sound that didn't belong. An engine, distant but approaching. His heart jumped into his throat. Someone was coming. He sat up too quickly, sending pain shooting through his ankle, and looked around for options. Hide? Run? Neither was realistic with his injury. Sonny had heard it too, and stood at the window, tail wagging uncertainly. A dog's instinct torn between excitement at visitors and loyalty to its person. Walt limped to the window and peered out. A dust cloud rose from the dirt road, getting closer. A vehicle, he could make out a shape now. Some kind of SUV or truck. His mind raced. Could be the property owner, checking on the place after the storm. Could be someone with less friendly intentions. Out here, this far from civilization, you never knew. The vehicle pulled into the yard and stopped. Walt watched as the driver's door opened and a woman climbed out. She was maybe in her 60s, wearing jeans and a work shirt, her grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She stood there for a moment looking at the house, and Walt could see something in her posture, familiarity. She knew this place. Before he could decide what to do, she started walking toward the house, and Walt realized she was carrying something. A box. She climbed the porch steps and knocked on the door, which was strange because the place looked abandoned. Unless she knew someone was here. "I know you're in there," she called out, her voice firm but not unkind. "Saw the smoke from your fire yesterday. Don't worry, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just want to talk." Walt exchanged a look with Sonny, then limped to the door. He opened it a crack, keeping his body between the woman and the puppy out of instinct. "Mom," he said. She looked him over with the practiced eye of someone used to assessing situations quickly. Her gaze lingered on his wrapped ankle, his weathered face, the dog peeking around his legs. "I'm Ellen Hayes," she said. "I own this property. Well, my family does. We used to live here." "I'm sorry," Walt started. "We needed shelter from the storm and the door was open," and she held up a hand. "It's fine. The place has been empty for 15 years. I come out every few months to check on it, make sure squatters haven't burned it down or torn it apart for scrap. You're the first person I found here who looks like they actually needed help." She gestured with the box. "Brought you some supplies. Food, water, medical stuff. Figured if you were desperate enough to break into an abandoned house, you were desperate enough to need it." Walt stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. Kindness from a stranger was not something he'd expected. "I didn't break in exactly," he said. "Window was open." "Sure it was," Ellen said with a slight smile. "You going to invite me in, or do we conduct all our business on the porch?" Walt stepped back and she entered, setting the box on the kitchen table. Sonny immediately trotted over to investigate, tail wagging. Ellen bent down and let the puppy sniff her hand. "Pretty little thing," she said. "What happened to its paws?" "Cut them on the rocks. I bandaged them as best I could." Ellen looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes, recognition maybe, or understanding. "You're a long way from anywhere," she said. "Walking?" "Yes, ma'am." "Where you headed?" "Copper Springs originally. But I twisted my ankle and—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing their entire situation. Ellen nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the box she'd brought. She began unpacking it. Bottles of water, cans of food, bread, fruit, and then something that made Walt's eyes widen. A proper first aid kit, and beneath it a veterinary supply kit. "I'm a vet," Ellen said, answering his unspoken question. "Retired now, mostly, but I still help out at the clinic in Copper Springs a few days a week. Let me look at that ankle." Before Walt could protest, she'd pulled out a chair and gestured for him to sit. He did, and she knelt down with a grace that belied her years, unwrapping his makeshift bandage and examining the swollen joint with gentle, practiced fingers. "Sprained," she said. "Not broken, which is lucky. You need to stay off it for at least a week, keep it elevated and iced when possible. You tried to walk 15 miles to Copper Springs on this, you'll do permanent damage." "I don't have a week," Walt said. You've got time," Ellen interrupted. "Because I'm offering you a deal. My place is about 5 miles from here, back toward civilization. Small ranch, nothing fancy. I've got a guest cabin that's sitting empty, and I've got work that needs doing, fences that need mending, stalls that need mucking, general maintenance. You help me out for a couple weeks, and I'll give you room and board, plus enough pay to get you and your dog wherever you're trying to go." Walt stared at her. "Why would you do that?" Ellen was examining Sonny's paws now, unwrapping the bandages carefully. "Because I've been where you are," she said quietly. "Not the specifics, but the general territory. Lost broke, not sure what comes next. Someone helped me when I needed it. You figured it's my turn to pass it along." She looked up at him, and Walt saw sincerity there and something else. Loneliness, maybe. The same loneliness that had been eating at him for months. "Besides," she continued, applying fresh ointment to Sonny's paws with professional efficiency, "I could use the company. Place gets quiet with just me and the horses. And this little one needs proper care. I can provide that. Walt felt something crack in his chest. Pride, maybe, or fear. He'd been alone for so long, pushing people away, convinced he didn't need anyone. But here was this woman offering help without judgment, without pity. Just straightforward kindness from one person to another. I don't know what to say, he managed. Say yes, Ellen said, wrapping Sonny's paws in proper bandages from her kit. Say yes, and then let me drive you both to my place before this ankle gets any worse. We'll get some food in you, some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start worrying about work. Sonny looked up at Walt, as if asking permission. The puppy had taken to Ellen immediately, which meant something. Dogs knew people in ways humans didn't. All right, Walt said finally. Yes, thank you. Ellen smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look younger. Good. Now, you got any belongings need gathering, or is this it? Just my pack, Walt said, pointing to where it lay by the couch. Travel light. Smart man. She stood and offered him a hand up. Come on, let's get you two settled. As they walked out to her truck, Walt leaning on Ellen's shoulder, Sonny trotting alongside, Walt couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. This morning he'd been a man at the end of his rope. No prospects, no hope. Now he had a destination, a purpose, however temporary. He had work to do and a place to stay. He had, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a future that extended past the next day. Ellen loaded them into the truck, Walt in the passenger seat, Sonny on his lap, and started the engine. As they pulled away from the homestead, Walt looked back at the house that had sheltered them. It looked different now, less abandoned, more like it was just waiting. Waiting for what? He couldn't say. That was my family's place, Ellen said as they drove. My parents built it in 1967, raised me and my brother there. Lots of good memories and some hard ones. Haven't been able to sell it, haven't been able to tear it down. Just keep it standing, I suppose, in case someone needs it. Like you did. It served us well, Walt said. I'm grateful. Gratitude's a good foundation, Ellen said. We'll build from there. They drove in comfortable silence, the desert rolling past the windows, Sonny dozing on Walt's lap. And for the first time since Clara died, Walt felt something that might have been peace. Ellen's ranch was modest, but well-maintained. A main house, a barn with 4 stalls, and a small cabin set back among cottonwood trees. She got Walt settled in the cabin, which was clean and simply furnished with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small kitchenette. Sonny immediately claimed the braided rug by the door as its own territory. Bathrooms through there, Ellen said, pointing. Fresh towels in the cabinet. I'll bring dinner over in a couple hours. Give you time to rest and clean up. There's a phone on the wall if you need anything. My number's on the paper next to it. After she left, Walt stood in the middle of the cabin, almost afraid to touch anything. It had been so long since he'd had a real roof over his head, real walls around him. The bed had clean sheets. The bathroom had hot water. These simple things felt like unimaginable luxury. He showered, the water almost too hot, washing away days of desert dust and grime. When he emerged, he found his clothes had been replaced with clean ones. Jeans and a work shirt in approximately his size, left folded on the bed. Ellen must have brought them while he was in the bathroom. The kindness of it threatened to undo him. That evening, Ellen arrived with dinner, a proper meal of pot roast, potatoes, and vegetables. They ate at the small table, Sonny getting scraps and loving every minute of it. The conversation was easy, comfortable. Ellen told stories about her veterinary practice, about difficult births she'd assisted and animals she'd saved. Walt found himself talking about the ranch, about Clara, about the life he'd lost. She sounds like she was something special, Ellen said when he finished. She was, Walt agreed. Kept me honest, kept me human. Ellen smiled, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of something Walt couldn't quite read. She stood and began clearing the dishes, and Walt saw her hand tremble slightly as she stacked the plates. "You all right?" he asked. She paused, her back to him, then set the dishes down and turned around. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Something I should have said earlier, but I wasn't sure how. Walt felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes, he thought. The catch. The price for all this kindness. I knew you were out there, Ellen said. Not specifically. I didn't know your name or anything about you. But I knew someone was at the homestead. I've been checking that place twice a week for the last month, waiting. Waiting for what? Ellen walked to her bag and pulled out a photograph. She handed it to Walt, and his heart stopped. It was Clara, younger, maybe in her 30s, standing next to a woman Walt didn't recognize. They had their arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at something off camera. "That's me," Ellen said, pointing to the other woman. "And that's Clara Morrison before she was Clara Granger. We grew up together, best friends from kindergarten through high school. Lost touch when she got married and moved west, and I went to veterinary school. But we wrote letters for years. She told me everything, about you, about the ranch, about the life you built together." Walt stared at the photograph, his hands shaking. "I don't understand. 6 months ago I got a letter from Sarah, your daughter. Clara had given her my address years ago, just in case. Sarah told me about her mother passing, about the ranch being sold, about you disappearing. She was worried sick, said you weren't answering calls, said she'd driven out looking for you, but you were just gone. Sarah contacted you." Walt's voice was barely a whisper. Ellen nodded. "She asked me to keep an eye out, said you might head this direction because Clara had talked about this area, about the old homestead where she and I used to play as kids. That was her family's place. Did she never tell you?" Walt shook his head, unable to speak. "Clara loved that house," Ellen continued softly. "We spent every summer there when we were young. She said it was the last place she felt completely free before adult responsibilities took over. She made me promise years ago that if anything ever happened to her, I'd watch over you. I told her that was ridiculous, that you were perfectly capable of taking care of yourself. But she insisted. Said you were stronger than anyone she knew, but that strength could become stubbornness if you didn't have someone to keep you from disappearing into yourself." Walt felt tears burning in his eyes. "She never said anything." "That was Clara's way," Ellen said gently. "She took care of people without making a fuss about it. When Sarah called, I started checking the homestead, leaving supplies, keeping watch. I figured if you were out there wandering like Sarah feared, eventually you might find your way to a place Clara loved. And you did." "The supplies at the house," Walt said, understanding dawning. "The medicine cabinet, the honey, I stock it every few weeks. Never knew if you'd show up or when, or if I was just being a sentimental old fool. But I promised Clara, and I keep my promises." Walt looked down at Sonny, who was watching this exchange with intelligent eyes. "What about the puppy?" Ellen smiled. "That's the part I didn't plan. That was just the universe deciding to help out. Or maybe it was Clara sending you something you couldn't ignore, something that would keep you moving forward." Walt stood up, needing to move, needing to process. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkening sky. All this time he'd thought he was alone. He'd thought Clara was gone and he had no one. But she'd been looking out for him even after death, setting things in motion to keep him safe. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" he asked. "Would you have accepted help if you knew?" Ellen countered. "Would you have come here if you thought it was charity, or obligation, or someone fulfilling a deathbed promise?" Walt thought about it and realized she was right. He would have refused, would have walked away out of pride or stubbornness or some misguided sense that he needed to handle everything himself. "Sarah must be worried sick," he said finally. "I called her after I found you. Told her you were safe, that you'd be staying here for a while." She cried. Happy tears, if that helps. Walt turned back to face Ellen. "I don't know what to say." "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Then don't say anything," Ellen replied. "Just accept that you're not alone and you never were." Clara saw to that. "And while you're here, you can help me with the work, like I said. It wasn't a lie. I do need help. But more than that, I think we both need the company. I think we both need to remember that connections matter, that people matter." She picked up the dishes again, gave him a moment to collect himself. At the door, she paused. "Clara loved you very much, Walt. The way she wrote about you, it was clear you were her whole world. She wouldn't want you walking into the desert to die. She'd want you living, really living. That's why she made sure I was here." After Ellen left, Walt sat on the bed with Sonny in his lap and the photograph in his hand. He studied Clara's young face, the joy in her eyes, the complete unself-consciousness of someone who knew she was loved. He thought about all the years they'd had together, all the conversations, all the shared silences. Had she been planning this even then? Setting up safeguards in case the worst happened? It was exactly the kind of thing she would do. Practical, quiet, loving, taking care of him without making him feel diminished by it. She was something, wasn't she? He said to Sonny, always 3 steps ahead, always thinking about everyone else. Sonny licked his hand, and Walt felt the last of his resistance crumble. He'd been so determined to be alone with his grief, so convinced that was what he deserved. But Clara hadn't wanted that for him. She'd wanted him to keep living, keep connecting, keep finding reasons to wake up in the morning. And maybe Sonny was part of that plan too, in some strange way. The puppy had appeared exactly when Walt needed it most, had given him something to care about besides his own pain. Whether that was chance or fate or Clara working from beyond, it didn't matter. What mattered was the result. Walt stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. Lights glowed in Ellen's house. The barn stood dark and solid against the night sky. Stars were beginning to appear, the same stars he'd watched with Clara 1,000 nights on their own ranch. "I'm going to make this work," he said quietly, to Clara, to himself, to the universe at large. "I'm going to honor what you did for me. I'm going to live." Sonny made a small sound of agreement, and Walt smiled despite the tears on his face. Tomorrow he'd start the work Ellen had mentioned. He'd begin earning his keep and rebuilding something resembling a life. He'd call Sarah and apologize for worrying her. He'd take the gift Clara had given him, this second chance, and he'd make something of it. But tonight, he'd just sit with the weight of love that extended beyond death, and let himself be grateful. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost like healing. Walt woke each morning to Sonny's cold nose pressed against his hand, the puppy's way of saying it was time to start the day. They'd walk to the main house for breakfast with Ellen. Then Walt would spend the day working, mending fences, mucking stalls, repairing the barn roof one careful section at a time. Despite his still healing ankle, the work was good for him. It gave his hands something to do, and his mind something to focus on, besides grief. Each repaired fence post felt like a small victory. Each fixed gate a step back toward being useful. Sonny followed him everywhere, growing stronger and more confident by the day. The puppy's paws had healed completely, and the small creature was developing into a proper dog, with personality and opinions. Ellen proved to be excellent company. She didn't talk just to fill silence, but when she did speak, it was worth listening to. In the evenings, they'd sit on her porch with coffee, sometimes whiskey, and she'd tell stories about Clara from their childhood. Walt heard about the time Clara convinced Ellen to sneak into the county fair after hours, and the summer they tried to run away to California, making it all of 10 miles before Clara's father found them. She was fearless, Ellen said one night, stars brilliant overhead. Not reckless, just she believed things would work out if you had good intentions and tried your best. Life proved her wrong sometimes, but she never stopped believing. "That's what I loved about her," Walt said quietly. "That optimism. It balanced out my tendency to see all the ways things could go wrong." Sarah called twice a week, and gradually Walt stopped feeling guilty about worrying her. She told him about the kids, about her husband's promotion, about the life they were building in Phoenix. Each conversation felt less like checking on an invalid and more like actual connection. She'd asked if he wanted to come visit for Thanksgiving, and Walt had said yes without the usual hesitation. One evening, about 3 weeks into his stay, Walt sat at the small table in his cabin with paper and pen. Sonny was asleep on the bed, twitching occasionally in dog dreams. Walt stared at the blank page for a long time before he began to write. "Dear Clara, I'm not sure why I'm writing this, since you're gone and won't read it. But Ellen says sometimes we need to say things out loud, or in this case on paper, to make them real in our own hearts. So here goes. I was angry at you for dying. Is that terrible to admit? I was angry that you left me to face everything alone. Angry that you'd fought so hard and still lost. Angry that all my prayers and bargaining with God meant nothing in the end. I'm still angry sometimes, if I'm being honest. The unfairness of it still hits me at odd moments. But I understand now what you did for me. Ellen told me everything about how you'd planned for this, how you'd made sure I wouldn't be completely alone, even if I tried to be. That's so like you, taking care of problems I didn't even know I'd have. You knew me better than I knew myself. You knew I'd try to disappear into grief, and you made sure there'd be someone to pull me back out if I got too lost. I found a puppy in the desert. Her name is Sunny, and she saved my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I was ready to lie down and let the desert take me, Clara. I was that far gone. Then this little golden dog appeared, and suddenly I had a reason to keep going. You would have loved her. She has your stubbornness and your way of looking at people like you can see right through to their soul. Ellen has been good to us. She gave me work and a place to stay, and more importantly, she gave me back some of my dignity. She treats me like a capable person, not a broken old man. That matters more than I can say. I'm healing, Clara, not healed. I'm not sure that ever fully happens when you lose someone. But healing. The wound is still there, but it's not bleeding all over everything anymore. I can think about you without wanting to die. I can remember the good times without being crushed by the fact that there won't be any more of them. That's progress, right? Zara wants me to come for Thanksgiving. I'm going to go. I'm going to see my grandkids and be present in their lives instead of being a ghost haunting the edges. You'd like that, I think. I still wear my ring. I'll always wear my ring. But I'm starting to understand that loving you doesn't mean I have to stop living. You certainly wouldn't have wanted that. You'd have boxed my ears for even considering it. So thank you, Clara. Thank you for loving me enough to take care of me even after you were gone. Thank you for knowing I'd need Ellen, and for making sure she'd be there. Thank you for every year we had together. Even though it wasn't enough years and never could have been, I'm going to be okay. That's what I wanted you to know. I'm going to figure out what comes next, and I'm going to keep going. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you taught me that life is precious and shouldn't be wasted, even when it's hard. I love you. I always will. Walty folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his Bible. Next to the photograph of Clara. He wouldn't mail it, there was nowhere to mail it, but having written it felt like completing something important. Like closing one chapter so another could begin. The next morning, Ellen found him oiling hinges on the barn door. "Got something to show you," she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. She led him to the far pasture where a mare stood with a gangly foal at her side. The baby was maybe 3 days old, all legs and curiosity. "Born Monday night," Ellen said. "Thought you might want to see." "You mentioned you used to breed horses back on your ranch." Walt approached slowly, letting the mare smell his hand. The foal watched him with huge liquid eyes, not quite brave enough to come close, but clearly interested. "Beautiful," Walt said. "What's her name?" "Haven't named her yet." "Thought maybe you'd like to." Walt studied the foal, the delicate legs, the 2 big ears, the way she stayed close to her mother, but kept glancing at the wider world with wonder. "Hope," he said finally. "Let's call her Hope." Ellen nodded. "That's good. That's real good." As they walked back to the barn, Ellen said, "I've been thinking. I know we said a couple weeks, but if you wanted to stay longer, maybe through the winter, I'd be glad of the help. And the company. Place to put Sunny when it gets cold, too." Walt had been thinking the same thing, but hearing her say it made it real. "I'd like that," he said. "If you're sure, I'm sure, that evening." Walt called Sarah and told her he'd found a place to stay for a while, that he was doing good work and healing, that he'd definitely be there for Thanksgiving. She cried again, but softer this time. Relief, maybe, or just happiness that her father was finding his way back to living. The days grew shorter as October deepened. Walt's ankle healed fully, though it ached before rain. Sunny grew into her paws and developed a passion for chasing rabbits, never catching them, but the chase was the point. Ellen taught Walt the basics of veterinary care, and he found himself drawn to the work of healing, of helping animals in distress one afternoon. As Walt was replacing boards on the barn, Ellen came out with a serious expression. "Got a call from the rescue organization," she said. "Someone's been dumping dogs out on Route 78, near where you found Sunny. They asked if I'd help coordinate a trap and rescue operation this weekend. Thought you might want to be part of it. Walt set down his hammer. The idea of dogs abandoned like Sonny had been, scared and alone in the desert, it made his blood run hot. What do you need me to do? Drive out with me, help set up the traps, keep watch. It's 2, maybe 3 days of camping in the desert. You up for that? Walt thought about the desert, about his walk through it with death on his mind. Going back felt like facing something, like coming full circle. I'm up for it, he said. Good. We leave Saturday morning. Friday night, Walt packed supplies with careful attention. Sonny watched from the doorway, head tilted in that way that meant she was asking a question. You're coming too, Walt assured her. Wouldn't leave you behind. He sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Ellen joined him, bringing 2 whiskeys. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their drinks, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to black. You've come a long way, Ellen said finally. Clara would be proud. Think so? I know so. She always said you were stronger than you gave yourself credit for. Said you just needed the right reason to show it. Walt looked down at Sonny, sleeping at his feet. She gave me that reason. Even after she was gone, she gave it to me. That's love, Ellen said. Real love. The kind that doesn't end just because someone dies. They sat together under the stars, 2 people who'd found their way through grief to something like peace. Tomorrow, they'd head back into the desert, but this time Walt wouldn't be running from life. He'd be running toward it, saving others the way he'd been saved, making meaning from suffering, living, really living, for the first time since Clara died. And somewhere, he hoped, she was watching and smiling. They drove out before dawn, Ellen's truck loaded with humane traps, food, water, and camping gear. Sonny rode between them, alert and watchful, somehow sensing this was different from their usual routines. The desert slowly revealed itself as the sun rose, endless and ancient, beautiful and merciless. Ellen turned onto Route 78, and Walt felt his chest tighten. This was the highway he'd walked, though from a different direction. This was the road that had nearly been the last thing he ever saw. Now he was coming back, but everything was different. He was different. They set up camp about 10 miles from where the rescue organization had reported the most recent dumping. Ellen showed Walt how to bait and set the traps, cages designed to close gently when a dog entered, keeping the animal safe until they could retrieve it. They positioned 6 traps along a 5-mile stretch, placing them near water sources and shelter where frightened dogs might naturally gravitate. Now we wait, Ellen said. Sometimes they come right away. Sometimes it takes days. Animals that have been abandoned. They're scared, suspicious. Can't blame them. They made camp in the shade of an outcropping, the same kind of formation Walt had sheltered under during his walk. Sonny explored the area thoroughly, marking territory and chasing scents. Walt found himself watching the horizon, remembering how it had wavered in the heat, how he'd thought he was seeing water when there was none. You all right? Ellen asked. Just thinking, Walt said. Last time I was out here, I was ready to die. Seems like a lifetime ago, even though it's only been weeks. That's because you're a different person now, Ellen said. Suffering either breaks you or transforms you. You chose transformation. Around noon they heard it, barking, high-pitched and desperate, coming from the direction of the traps. They grabbed water and supplies and headed toward the sound. The first trap held a small terrier mix, matted and thin, barking its defiance at the world. When Walt approached slowly, speaking soft and low, the barking turned to whimpering. It's all right, he said, the same words he'd said to Sonny. You're safe now. We've got you. Ellen checked the dog over. Dehydrated, malnourished, but no serious injuries. They loaded the trap into the truck bed, covering it with a tarp for shade, and left water and food within reach. The little dog ate ravenously, then curled up and slept the sleep of the completely exhausted. By evening, 2 more traps had been triggered. Another small dog, younger, and what looked like a beagle mix with soulful eyes and ribs showing. Walt felt rage building in his chest. How could people do this? How could anyone abandon animals in the desert to die slowly of thirst and heat? But then he thought about his own journey. He'd abandoned himself in a way. Walked into the desert meaning not to come back. Maybe the people who dumped these dogs were in their own kind of pain. making terrible choices because they couldn't see any other option. It didn't excuse it, but it made it human, understandable, if not forgivable. That night they sat by a small fire, the 3 rescued dogs sleeping in their traps near the truck. Sonny lay between Walt and Ellen, content. The desert was silent, except for the crackling of mesquite wood and the occasional yip of distant coyotes. "Found something today," Walt said, pulling an old dog collar from his pocket. "Near the 3rd trap. Been there a while, looks like." Ellen examined it. The leather was cracked and faded, but you could still make out a name etched into a tarnished metal tag. Duke. No phone number, no address. Just a name, proof that someone had once cared enough to give this animal an identity. "Duke made it, or he didn't," Ellen said quietly. "We'll never know. But we saved these 3. That matters. That's what we can control." Walt nodded, turning the collar over in his hands. "Duke, some family's pet, maybe. Or a working dog from a ranch. Or a stray someone had briefly cared for before circumstances changed. Each animal had a story, just like each person did. And sometimes the stories didn't end well, but sometimes they did. Sometimes a lost creature found exactly what it needed, exactly when it needed it. "Clara sent Sonny to me," Walt said, surprising himself. "I know how that sounds, but I believe it. She knew I'd need something to care about, something that needed me. That's what saved me, being needed." "I don't think it sounds strange at all," Ellen replied. "I think love finds ways to persist, even when we think it's gone. And I think these dogs we saved today, they'll go on to be someone's reason to keep going. That's how it works. We save each other in chains, each act of kindness rippling forward." Walt looked up at the stars, the same stars he'd looked at with despair just weeks ago. Now they seemed less distant, less cold, just witnesses to the ongoing drama of living, of struggling, of sometimes finding grace in the most unexpected places. Tomorrow, they'd check the remaining traps, then head back to the ranch with whatever dogs they'd found. They'd get the animals medical care, food, safety. Eventually, those dogs would find new homes, new families, new purposes. They'd be scared and traumatized for a while, but they'd heal, just like Walt was healing. The fire burned down to embers, and they slept in their bedrolls under the open sky, surrounded by saved lives and second chances. Morning brought 2 more dogs, one in a trap, one that had been circling it nervously, too scared to enter. The trapped dog was a shepherd mix, old, grey around the muzzle, with kind eyes that had seen too much. The circling dog was younger, some kind of hound, and it took Walt 40 minutes of patient coaxing before it would take food from his hand. "You've got a gift for this," Ellen said, watching Walt work. "The scared ones trust you." "Maybe because I know what it's like to be scared," Walt replied. "To feel like the world's turned against you and there's no safe place left." The hound finally let Walt slip a leash around its neck, then immediately pressed against his leg, seeking comfort. Walt felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain, but its opposite. The feeling of being useful, of having something to offer, of mattering to another living creature. They loaded the new dogs into the truck, making sure everyone had water and food. 5 dogs total, 5 lives saved. The rescue organization would pick them up tomorrow, get them into foster care, eventually into permanent homes. But for now, they were Walt and Ellen's responsibility. As they broke down the camp, Ellen pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. All 5 dogs visible in their secure spaces, Sonny standing guard like a proud parent. "For the record," she said, "these are the ones we got. The ones Duke didn't have to be." Walt studied the dogs, each one different, each one carrying its own trauma and hope. The terrier was still defensive, growling at shadows. The beagle mix had attached itself to Ellen, following her with desperate devotion. The shepherd mix lay quiet, conserving energy with the wisdom of age. The hound stayed close to Walt, and Sonny moved between them all, checking on each one, offering the comfort of presence. "I want to do this again," Walt said suddenly. "The rescue work. If you'll have me as a partner." Ellen looked at him with surprise and pleasure. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." They drove back toward the ranch, but took a detour at Walt's request. He wanted to see the abandoned gas station where he and Sonny had found water, where he'd made the decision to keep living. Ellen navigated the rough roads until they found it, still standing, still offering its meager shelter. Walt got out and walked to the spigot. He turned the handle. Water still flowed, rusty but real. He cupped his hands under it, drank, then splashed his face. Behind him, Ellen let all the dogs out for a break, and they spread across the concrete pad, stretching and sniffing and exploring. "This is where it started," Walt said. "Where I chose Sonny over giving up. Where the story changed." Sonny came over and sat beside him, pressing against his leg the way the hound had done. Walt knelt down and held the puppy, no, the dog now, growing into itself, and felt gratitude so intense it hurt. "Thank you," he whispered, "for finding me, for needing me, for giving me a reason." Ellen joined him, and together they watched the rescued dogs explore their temporary freedom. The shepherd mix found a patch of shade and lay down with a satisfied groan. The terrier chased a lizard. The beagle mix rolled in the dust. The hound sat alert, watchful, slowly beginning to believe it might be safe. "You know what I see," Ellen said. "I see the same thing happening to you that's happening to these dogs. Coming back to life, learning to trust again, starting to believe in tomorrow." "Clara knew," Walt said. "She knew I'd need this. All of it, you, Sonny, this work. She knew I'd need to be part of something bigger than my own grief." "She knew you," Ellen agreed. "Really knew you. That's the gift of a long marriage. Someone sees you completely and loves you anyway, and then sets things up so you can't completely self-destruct when they're gone." They loaded the dogs back up and continued toward home. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, the same colors Walt had seen the morning he found Sonny. But everything was different now. Then he'd been walking toward an ending. Now he was driving toward a beginning. At the ranch, they settled the dogs in the barn, each in a clean stall with water, food, and blankets. Sonny supervised the whole operation, somehow understanding these were special guests who needed gentle treatment. Ellen called the rescue organization to arrange pickup for the next afternoon. Later, standing on the porch with coffee and watching stars appear, Walt said, "I want to call Sarah tonight. Tell her about this, about the rescue, about finding purpose again." "She'll be glad to hear it," Ellen said. "She's been worried about you for a long time." "I know. But I'm not that person anymore. The one she was worried about, he's gone. Or maybe not gone, but changed. Transformed into someone who wants to be here, who sees reasons to stay." Ellen smiled. "Then call her. Let her hear that in your voice. That's the best gift you can give her." Walt did, standing in the cabin with Sonny at his feet, telling Sarah about the dogs they'd saved and the work he wanted to do. She cried, of course. His daughter had inherited Clara's tender heart. But they were good tears, healing tears. When he hung up, Walt looked at the photograph of Clara on his nightstand, the one from their anniversary. He picked it up and studied her face, that smile he'd loved for 50 years. "I'm okay now," he told her. "I'm really okay. And I'm going to keep being okay. Because of you, because of what you set in motion. I'm going to make it count, Clara. Every day I have left, I'm going to make it count." He set the photograph down gently and climbed into bed. Sonny jumped up, something Walt usually discouraged but tonight allowed, and curled against his side. And for the first time since Clara died, Walt fell asleep without the weight of grief crushing his chest. He fell asleep with hope. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that made you grateful for coffee and wood fires. Walt was up early, helping Ellen prepare the guest rooms. Sarah was driving in with her family, and the excitement had been building all week. Sonny seemed to sense something special was happening, following Walt from room to room with heightened alertness. In the month since the rescue operation, the ranch had transformed into something more than just Ellen's property. It had become a staging area for animal rescues across 3 counties. Word had spread about the cowboy and the vet who were willing to drive into the desert to save abandoned dogs. They'd rescued 23 animals so far, and everyone had found a home. Walt had found his home too, though it had taken him a while to accept it. The cabin was his now in all the ways that mattered. His clothes in the closet, his books on the shelf, photographs of Clara and Sarah on the mantel. Ellen had offered to make it official. He could stay as long as he wanted, paying rent through his work on the ranch and with the rescues. He'd agreed, finally understanding that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Ellen emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. Pie's in the oven. Turkey's looking good. Think we're ready for the invasion? Invasion, Walt said with a smile. It's 4 people. 4 people I'm not used to having around. That's an invasion to someone who lives alone. But she was smiling too. In the past months, something had shifted between them. Not romance. They were both too old and too content with their independence for that. But a deep friendship, the kind forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. They understood each other's silences and celebrated each other's small victories. Round noon, Sarah's car pulled into the drive. Walt's heart lifted at the sight of his daughter, older now than Clara had been when they first met, but with her mother's smile. The grandkids spilled out, Jack 9 and Emma 7, full of energy and questions. "Grandpa!" Emma shrieked, launching herself at Walt. He caught her laughing, feeling his joints protest but not caring. This was what life was supposed to be: connection, family, love expressed in squealing grandchildren and tight hugs. Jack was more reserved, but his eyes lit up when he saw Sunny. "Is that the dog? The one from the desert?" "That's her," Walt said. "Sunny, come say hello." Sunny approached cautiously, then let Jack pet her. Within minutes, the boy and dog were inseparable, running around the yard while Emma tried to keep up. Sarah hugged Walt tight, then stepped back to study him. "You look good, Daddy, really good, healthy." "I feel good," Walt said, and realized it was true. "Ellen takes care of me." "And the work. It matters, Sarah. I'm doing something that matters." "Mum would be so proud," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "She'd be—" Her voice broke, and Walt pulled her close. "She knew," he said. "Somehow she knew exactly what I'd need, and made sure I'd find it. That's what real love does. It prepares for possibilities you hope never happen." Dinner was loud and joyful, the table crowded with food and laughter. The kids told stories about school. Sarah talked about her job. Ellen shared rescue stories, and Walt filled in details she'd forgotten. They were a family, not the traditional kind, but the kind you built from circumstances and choices and need. After dinner, while Ellen and Sarah cleaned up and the kids played with Sunny, Walt walked out to the barn. The November air was crisp, smelling of sage and coming winter. The horses nickered at his approach, hoping for treats. He gave them each an apple, taking his time, letting the peace of the moment settle into his bones. He thought about the man who'd walked into the desert ready to die. That person felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. What had changed? Everything and nothing. Clara was still gone. That grief would always be part of him, but it was no longer the only thing defining him. He'd found space for other feelings, purpose, friendship, hope. Ellen joined him, holding something wrapped in cloth. "Made you something," she said, handing it to him. "Well, made it for Sunny, technically, but it's really for both of you." Walt unwrapped it. A leather collar, beautifully crafted, with Sunny's name on one side and Clara's initials on the other. It was perfect. It acknowledged the past, while celebrating the present. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick. "She brought you together," Ellen said. "Seemed right to acknowledge that." They walked back to the house together, and Walt called Sunny over. He removed the old collar, the simple one he'd bought in town, and fastened the new one around her neck. Sunny sat patiently, then licked his hand as if she understood the significance. That night, after Sarah's family had gone to bed in the guest rooms, Walt sat on his cabin porch with Sunny at his feet. The stars were brilliant, countless, eternal. He thought about all the nights he'd looked at these same stars, with Clara on their ranch, alone in the desert ready to die, with Ellen planning their next rescue. The stars hadn't changed. He had. Sometimes when a man has lost everything, it takes the smallest soul to show him what's worth saving. Walt had learned that truth in the desert, and he was living it every day. Sunny had saved him by needing him, and in turn, he'd saved dozens of other animals. The circle of rescue kept expanding, one lost creature helping another find their way home. He looked down at Sonny, sleeping peacefully, the new collar gleaming in the starlight. The puppy who'd begged for help had become the dog who'd taught him how to live again. That was the miracle of it. That was the grace. "Thank you," Walt whispered, to Sonny, to Clara, to Ellen, to the universe that had brought them all together. "For everything. For this life I didn't know I could have." A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and beautiful. Walt watched it go, then stood to head inside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more rescues, more moments of connection. Tomorrow and all the days after that. He was ready for them. He was finally ready to live, and somewhere in the vast tapestry of existence, he believed Clara was smiling, knowing her plan had worked, knowing the man she'd loved had found his way back to the light. Not by forgetting her, but by honoring what she'd taught him, that love persists, that purpose heals, and that sometimes salvation comes on 4 small paws when you need it most.